Are cartels now functionally corporations? More disturbingly, could they one day use their power, brutality, and influence to not infiltrate, but to replace governments? Yes? History is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. Drug lords in Mexico and abroad, as you point out, Noel, they have come and gone, and new groups have risen to power as ephemeral loyalties fade and shift, as political protection and patrons change. Killings and arrests, they leave vacuums in leadership, and crime, just like nature, abhors a vacuum. In this quick and dirty history, already we see a clear pattern. The criminals, like mafia and bootleggers before them, found success by applying corporate tactics to crime, by organizing their efforts, collectivizing, by demarcating their territory. They sought consistency in their product. And most importantly, this is a crazy thing, they realized two things. They said, look, we don't need to fight the law if we can buy the law. It's like a Sith version of lobbying, which, lobbying is a Sith version of lobbying. But, and you pointed this out as well, Noel, earlier, you got to diversify your funds, right? Today, cartels don't just run drugs. They peddle political influence. They've got their hands or tentacles or or their firearms in numerous front companies. They dabble in non-drug stuff, avocados. We talked about that.
Limes.
Smuggling limes, also limes. Don't forget the limes. They smuggle guns. They smuggle human beings. Hey, the cartels seem to say, get it straight. We're not just about cocaine these days. And at some point, we have to ask, are cartels now functionally corporations? More disturbingly, could they one day use their power, brutality, and influence to not infiltrate, but to replace governments? Yes?
Well, what was the question again, Ben? Could cartels replace a government?
And are they functionally corporations?
Okay. Yeah, you're right. Yes to both. You're correct.
That's our show.
Yep.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, well,
we'll see you on the road.
Yeah, good episode.
Good game. Good game. I mean, you're right. It's fascinating and it's terrifying in equal parts. Yes, cartels, the ones that are around now, ones that have survived the eternal, ongoing Game of Thrones and what's that show? Succession. They kind of do a Succession thing. All of those who have survived because they behave increasingly like legitimate corporations. And yes, folks, this is not a theory. They could potentially replace elected governments, either in part, it's already happening, or entirely. And this is where we want to introduce one of the stars of our show today, a journalist named Tom Wainwright. I love this guy. I love his work. And you don't have to love it, but you should know about it.
Yeah.
You should know about it, especially if you feel like my day is going too well. I'm having too much of a good time. I need to pump the brakes on my happiness. Well, Tom Wainwright is your dude.
He pulls right up to the curb and says, let me handle this. Tommy Wayne, right? Yes, that's me. This dude's awesome. There's a great interview you can find with him. Oh, I know it was NPR, but I can't remember.
Terry Gross. It was Fresh Air.
It was Fresh Air. It's really great interview you should check out. He wrote an amazing book from his reporting that he was doing for The Economist for a long time.
Yeah, back in 2010, our pal Tom gets a job with The Economist. It's prestigious. It's a prestigious magazine, and it is a periodical that is entirely focused on macro and microeconomics, right, which inevitably touches politics. So Tom is the Mexico correspondent, and he knows his remit as he's going in. His job in Mexico is to cover the biggest businesses in that country. So this is stuff like the oil industry, which is big there. This is stuff like maybe water, banking, mobile communications, tequila, which is still, it's huge. And surprise, surprise, Tom, you also have to cover another big business, the drug trade.
Especially
And
the illegal
like,
ones.
yeah, right. Like, this is the point where we have to take a little bit of a sidebar and ask how much money these cartels make. Now, we're not above calling out things that need to be called out. So we have to give a stuff they don't want you to know, womp womp, to Senator David Perdue from Georgia in 2019.
So Purdue told the Senate International Narcotics Control Caucus that these operations were bigger than most people could possibly imagine. And he stated the following: at $500 billion, 500 billion, that makes the cartel business and the drug traffic just in Mexico alone coming across the United States bigger than Walmart, to put it in perspective. So this is larger than our largest companies.
$500 billion.
Just think about all the yachts, guys.
Copious yachts.
So many yachts.
Yeah, yachts are the Pringles of being a billionaire. You can never stop one.
once you yacht, you just can't stop.
There it is. I mean, it's a crazy quote, right? Most people, and I say this not as a ding, this is just an observation. Most people will have a very difficult time grasping just how much $1 billion is, let alone 500 billion, let alone $1 trillion. U.S. politicians, in case you're listening and you're not in the U.S., you should know our folks are famous for convenient hyperbole. So we got to unpack this a little bit. The actual estimates about how much money the drug trade makes, they're all over the place. If you look at Mexico, you have to kind of make an imaginary pie and then sort of eyeball what you think Mexico's cartel's slice of that pie is. So it's really tricky. All the estimates are reverse engineered, and they're kind of a they're kind of a cosmic gumbo, if you will, of
Yes, please.
All right, you're on record. Yes, they take different statistics that can help them triangulate the whole picture. So you take stuff like the street value of how is cocaine most often sold? Is it sold by like gram metric system?
That's right. I think that would be like the base level. I think you can get much less than a gram.
I've always heard this, like, you get $100 of cocaine, no matter what, no matter when it is, no matter what year, no matter where you are. It's $100 and it's cocaine. You'll love it.
Well, let's also just
That's
point
a
out,
promise to you.
that was very good. Is that your cocaine barker voice?
We got more cocaine.
Okay,
It's
good.
over here. We got piles of it, but it's only $100
Come
a
and
pop.
get it. Mommy's little helpers. Come and get yourself. No, you have to also remember that, like, the idea of weight, that only applies to distributors and people that are really doing the business. Like, if you're buying street drugs, you're not likely going to get, verification of the weight or purity, or even the guarantee that it won't just kill you outright because it's got rat poison or fentanyl in it.
No, yeah. Not for nothing do people talk about stepping on the cane. So yeah, the estimates are coming instead from tangentially related things like the street value of a given amount of a given substance or drug consumption rates, which are already really tricky because when something's illegal, not a lot of people are going to tell you they're doing it unless they have to. Or they look at stuff that might seem not as related, like the amount of US dollars that are repatriated from Mexico to the United States. Anyway, with all this, with this weird mixtape, this salad, this goulash of related statistics, what you find is that since about 2006, estimates have varied widely. Experts will tell you that there is anything from 6 billion to 29 billion US dollars worth of value going through these Mexican cartels. Now, that might not be $500 billion, but let's be honest, it's a lot. The UN, for a wider scope here, the UN estimated back in 2011, they said worldwide proceeds from drug trafficking and what they called transnational organized crime were the equivalent of 1.5% of the entire economic product of the human planet. 1.5% of everything.
Yeah. And that number, by the way, is $870 billion, at least in 2009 dollars.
Right, but that's not Mexico. That's everyone.
That's everybody.
So
that's
again,
that's
we're back,
GDP, global domestic product.
Yeah. So back to this caucus you mentioned, Noel. Senator Dianne Feinstein, just to put this in like an across-the-board perspective for U.S. political wonks, she is hanging at that caucus June 11th of the same year, and she says, quote, the illicit drug trade is a business valued at anywhere between 426 and 652 billion. Its reach is global, its distribution is growing, its leadership is criminal. So these politicians are kind of throwing out guesses, but they're all big numbers. There's no one who's coming along and saying, playing Price is Right. No one is saying, I think it's 426 billion and $1.
Yeah, I was gonna say, or just shoot for $1 with those giant figures. You probably win. Man, well, Ben, I want to go back to old Tommy Wayne, right? Tom Wainwright, the awesome person who was interviewed on NPR that we've been discussing, because he did write a book about his travels and his reporting with the economists down there. And man, he lays it out so plainly and clearly. I think we've got a quote from him, right?
We do indeed, Matt. He says, so he's talking about how weird his job became, right? When he gets, he's thinking, I'm going to report on mobile phones and maybe tequila. And he says instead, quote, I found that one week I'd be writing about the car business. The next week I'd be writing about the drugs business. I gradually came to see that the two actually were perhaps more similar than people normally recognize. Now, Tom hasn't, sponsored the show or anything. We're just a fan of good sources and primary sources. So he wrote a book called Narconomics. Clever portmanteau, Tom. Narconomics, How to Run a Drug Cartel. And it very much is like a textbook. So we're going to dive into some of this stuff. What does he find? This is so amazing to me. Oh, my God. What does he find?
Well, we'll tell you what he found. He found that these companies were using business models that were very, very similar to the types of strategies and organizational kind of arrangements that big box stores or even fast food franchises use. And you'll remember back to that quote we referenced about Walmart in terms of like the amount of capital they're generating. So them being one of the biggest U.S. chains, Walmart in certain industries are effectively the only buyer for certain products. And this is the same deal with cartels, and that becomes the idea of being an exclusive buyer. That is part of the cartel model. And we were talking a little bit off air about how I thought I just mentioned the character of Gus Fring on Breaking Bad, and how he in his straight kind of cover life owns and operates and runs day to day this like fast food franchise, the La Pollos Hermanos, and he does that with the same like fastidiousness and attention to detail, and in some cases ruthlessness, as he runs his illegal drug operation. And it's a revenue stream in and of itself, but it feels like they kind of are like existing in these like very interesting parallel paths. I didn't know if you guys that occurred to either of you in looking into this stuff.
Well, yeah, if
Oh, yeah.
if you think about that example, and you imagine the price of the raw chicken that Gus Fring buys in order to cook and then sell in his stores, right? You can think about it the same way as the cocoa leaf for the cocoa plants that are grown in very specific parts of South America over there, like only a couple of places in the Andes Mountains. So like if the price of that chicken in Gus Fring's case changes, Gus has to make a decision. Am I going to raise my prices, or am I going to make other operating cost changes in order to make up, for how much I'm going to make, how much income I'm going to have, how much profit I'm going to make. It's the same thing with the drug cartels. So they manipulate variables, as we said, Ben.
So, okay, let's think of Tom's example here. Let's think of big box stores in the United States and in North America in general. Walmart is one of the biggest chains. It's so big that the children born to the founder were automatically billionaires, if not multimillionaires. In certain industries right now, Walmart is effectively the only buyer of a good, so they call the shots to the suppliers. This means that if there's, in quoting Tom here, if there is a disruption to some sort of supply and Walmart runs that supply chain, Tom uses the example of like a bad harvest year for apples. Apple growers, in that case, they can't increase their prices because Walmart is the only buyer. Therefore, Walmart dictates the price. So Walmart can say, dang, sucks that you had a bad harvest, but we already made the price. And if you don't sell it to us, I guess just put them somewhere because they're not going anywhere else.
And that makes way more sense when you're talking about a drug cartel and somebody, let's say, growing coca plants and coca leaves, because you have one person that you can sell it to, and if you don't sell it to that person, your life could be in danger. Right? If it just goes somewhere else and you try and offload it somewhere else, you could be in trouble with the person that would have usually purchased it, even if they're not going to buy it at their going price.